Fernando's been looking at studying leadership, studying Los Angeles, studying voting records, lots of information that can drive change. And it is my pleasure to introduce Fernando Guerra.
Thank you, Regina. I think I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership and my views on how, I think Dr. Ross talked about not hanging out with people that you are like you, but that's hard to do. I like to hang out with people like you, and we tend to do that all the time. But I also, many people assume that professors are at the ivory tower and only hang out with people like themselves. But I actually have the privilege in terms of doing research to be able to go and hang out with others in terms of focus groups, and then also in a virtual way by all the surveys that we do. And so I'm going to be talking to you about, I hung out with 2,400 people in January virtually through a survey that I did of 2,400 Angelenos, and want to give you a little bit of that flavor. Let's see here. So one of the things at the Center for the Study of Los Angeles that I'm trying to figure out is the future of Los Angeles by taking a look at the past and, of course, the current situation. And, when we take a look at forecasting, and I first proposed this project, people are like, hey, the UCLA, they tend to do this incredible forecast, and they are the gold standard. But I was a little bit, while it's an incredible forecast, what they tend to do is this, what we call economic forecasting, all the economic data. And UCLA does that, the LA EDC does that, VICA does that, a variety of different other groups do that. And I wanted to go beyond economic forecasting. Now, in our presentation and what we do when we make this presentation, we do some economic forecasting. But I believe that as leaders, when you make a decision, you need a triad of information. Not only economic data in terms of where are we going, what does the data tell us in terms of what we're going, but then also public opinion data. Where do people think we're going? And then leadership data, where are the leaders going to take us? Okay? Now, I don't include you guys in this type of leadership. This is very institutional leadership, and I hope you're not too institutional leadership. I see you as outside advocating and trying to force these leaders to respond to this and to this, because oftentimes, instead of them responding to what people want and what the economy tells us is occurring, they respond to their own institutional incentives. And you, as agents of change, have to be outside pushing these leaders with this information and this information. And that's, I think, my takeaway in terms of some of this data that we have. Let me just, this is like, all of this is on our webpage. Basically, this is just saying, what are the demographics of the people that we interviewed, just to show you the legitimacy that we got it right. And one thing that you'll notice is that the Latino population here is 44%. This is a county-wide survey, and we all know that the Latino population is over 50%. But remember, this is about we only interviewed adults 18 and over, and so that's why it's 44% Latino. But all the basic stuff that you would see here. And then this is the leaders' demographics. What we did is so difficult to define what leadership means, who's a leader. And so I copped out, and trying to get some geographic diversity, we interviewed the city managers of the 88 cities in Los Angeles County, and we're only able to get to 57 of them. And so this is the demographics of the 57 this is demographics of the 57 city managers in the county of Los Angeles. A couple of things stand out. Incredibly, males, right? The other thing that's really interesting is they're all married. If you want to stay married, become a city manager, I guess. The other thing is that of all the city managers, of the 88 city managers in LA County, there's only 2 African Americans. Guess what cities? Compton and Inglewood. Okay? And there's only 2 Asian Americans. Okay? And actually Latinos, proportionally to the adult population and all that, are doing pretty good in this situation. But I'll talk a little bit more about why I chose this group in terms of leadership. They are the institutions. They protect and make public policy, and I thought it was good to interview them. By the way, they were very responsive in terms of, we could have probably interviewed all 88 if we had had enough time. Only one city manager refused to meet with us. It was interesting why. I actually ended up spending almost as much time talking to him than had he done the interview. Just very quickly, you all know this, the demographic contest of Los Angeles County. You just see from 1970, if you take it all the way back to 60, the line would be even steeper. What you do see is things tailing out, and I'm actually going to project that the end of white flight in Los Angeles. Do you realize that Los Angeles is the second largest white city in America? We oftentimes think about Los Angeles as being the largest Latino city in America, okay, which it is, but it's also the second largest white city in America. Los Angeles County, of course, is the largest county in America, and that's because New York City and the New York area is divided into all those different boroughs which consider counties. But we're the largest county in America. We have the largest Latino population of any county. We have the largest Asian population of any county, and we also have the second largest white population of any county. Okay? And so whites are part of the mix, and then when we start talking about multicultural LA, if we don't include whites, it number one, privileges them, and number two, doesn't give us the reality. And so we have to talk about that. And one of the things that we're thinking is that Los Angeles will not decline any further in terms of the number of whites. Whites are actually increasing in the city, and that they will never dip between under 1 million. Whites are currently 1.2 million of LA City's population, 2.4 million of the county's population. And so if they were an ethnic group, we'd be talking very differently about them, right? But we tend not to think about it that way. And this is LA County. Let's see here. And this is the city of LA, very similar. As a matter of fact, of all the different major cities and counties, LA is is probably the one area where the city and the county that it's in, their demographics are almost mirror themselves. In most other major metropolitan areas, the suburbs are very different than the rest of the county. And in LA, in a sense, we're very fortunate that the major metropolitan area, meaning city of LA, and the county mirror themselves quite a bit, okay? All right, so then, one of the things that we wanted to do is find out what people are thinking. And this should help you in terms of, you're going to find out that my conclusion is that the residents of Los Angeles, both the city and the county, think a lot more like you than the leaders, both the elected and the institutional leaders think like them, okay? You're in concert with them. They are not. You need to help push the leaders to reflect what the population wants and what you intuitively know what you want or what they want or what needs to happen. But one of the key things, we've done over 25 major surveys at the Center for the Study of Los Angeles in the last 10 years, and this is a question we ask all the time. How do you think things are going, in the right direction or wrong direction? And you can see that people are pretty optimistic. So my number two conclusion is that you have an incredibly optimistic population in Los Angeles. Incredibly optimistic, and you're going to see that in these numbers. And it's always the closer you get to your reality, the more optimistic you are. And so you can see right here that people are incredibly optimistic about their neighborhood. 80% of the people in LA County think their neighborhood's going in the right direction. Obviously, if you accumulate that, 80% of the people are happy about their neighborhood, even though when you talk about the county as a whole, it's 69%. And that's the further you get away, the more of an abstraction it is, the more detached you are, and you don't know what's really happening there to the same degree. And this is the same finding. Obviously, we have this survey, by the way, was done in January of this year, 2,400. It's the largest general social survey done in the Los Angeles region. And it was replicated. We did it first in January of 2014, and then we replicated it in January of 2015. And we already have the funding to do it again in 16 and in 17. And so we will continue to do this, but you can already see the uptick a little bit in terms of optimism, okay? And this is the kind of the same thing you get when, you know, all those surveys we ask about Congress. People hate Congress, right? But then you ask them about their congressmen, and they're great, right? And so it is the same thing. You know, people love their neighborhoods. They're okay with the county, but they really love their neighborhoods. Optimism, incredible optimism. And then by race and ethnicity, what do you see? Consistent, not only in Los Angeles, but in California and nationally, we consistently find that Latinos and Asian Americans are much more optimistic than whites and African Americans. And there's a variety of different reasons for that. But again, you see it both in 14 and 15. It's just the way it's been going for, and we've asked this question, like I said, for over 15 years in different contexts. And again, we get the same pattern over and over. Taking a look at other surveys that have been done nationally, we get the same thing. And then we started asking also about household situation and finances. You see, while they have a general sense of things that are going very well, in terms of finances, is not as positive, but it's still pretty positive, much more positive than one would have expected. And I'm sorry that I'm speaking fast and going through this, but Regina only gave me like 25 minutes. And I teach a course once a week that's 3 hours, and that's I'm usually talking about the 3-hour aspect. Unemployment, we asked, and you can see how consistent it was about, this was probably one of the most pessimistic answers that we got, that only a third think that unemployment will decrease. Many think that it'll actually continue to increase, and about a third say the same. But look at the consistency between 14 and 15, okay? And then you can see also the optimism that Latinos are a little bit more optimistic, okay? Economic disparity. This is a major conclusion number 3. This is one of the major conclusions that we found, that people are really pessimistic. This is the number one thing they're pessimistic about. They believe that economic disparity will actually get worse, not better. You're optimistic about your life. You're optimistic about a little bit about your finances. You're okay about unemployment. But when you asked in general, hey, is economic disparity going to get worse? Absolutely. Okay? People are very pessimistic about this. This is the number one pessimistic indicator that we have, followed by this. Home ownership, home affordability. People just don't believe that Angelenos can afford to buy houses. And right here, the second, down here at the bottom, do you think the majority of residents in your city can afford to buy a home? Only 17% believed it in 2014, 20% in 2015. Okay, leaders are a little bit more optimistic about it because that's their economic situation, you know. But you look at this, right? And then to top that off, not only do you not believe you can afford to buy a home, you believe that the prices are going to increase. Okay, so strong belief in economic disparity and strong belief about the lack of affordability. These two are the drivers to pessimism, but yet people remain incredibly optimistic. All right, this is something we did for the mayor. I didn't even, well, we just had Nepal, so it's good to actually reflect on that. Do you consider to be, how many of you consider yourself to be earthquake prepared? Okay, not enough. All right, and then we had this question, obviously in January, and do you feel LA is prepared enough for future drought conditions? Obviously, 60% believe not. All right. Another major conclusion is that we are increasingly developing a Angeleno identity. And what I mean by that is when we ask people, do you consider yourself to be an Angeleno? Look at that. 77% of, this is countywide. So this is people outside of the city of LA. They believe that they consider themselves Angelenos. Okay, 77%. And look at this. Latinos more so as Asian Americans than whites. 84% to 65%. Okay? Not only that, if you are foreign born, you weren't born in LA, you immigrate, you consider yourself to be more of an Angeleno. Okay? 89%. Uh-huh. So if you're a Latino immigrant, you are much more likely to consider yourself an Angeleno. Okay, and same for, you see Asian Americans, and so it's an incredible results that we love to see. And we found something similar in 2014. So there is such a thing as developing an Angeleno identity, going a little bit beyond ethnicity. I don't have time to go into all of those, but let's see if we have, okay. And Regina mentioned at the introduction that we lean left, okay? So does LA. Okay, and we took all these questions to ask Angelenos. Basically, it comes. I'm doing another project about voting and civic engagement, and one of my conclusions there is one of the reasons we have such low voting turnout is that there is no ideological competition. The big wedge issues that we see in national politics don't exist in Los Angeles, okay? They've all been settled. Here you go, right here. This is about as leftist as you can get, okay? And it cuts across all ethnic groups, all right? And so you, leftist, are not out of touch. I know there's a few conservatives out here, okay? But that's okay, because there's a few conservatives here too, okay? But just for you to know that when you're thinking, oh, we're out of touch, et cetera, no, you're not. This is over and over we see this in a variety of different issues. And one of the ways I like to explain it to my students is, had white America only voted, Obama would not have been president. Had white California only voted, Obama would not have won California. But had white Angelenos only voted, Obama would have won. Okay? So this is not being driven by blacks, Latinos, and Asians. This has been driven by all three and whites. Okay? So this is and we see it also in terms of partisanship. As you've all heard the news, that less than 30% of registered voters in California are Republican. In LA County, it's less than 20%. In the city of LA, it's less than 15%. Okay? It's just a tremendous decline that you see happening. Okay. Again, we started this the year that Eric Garcetti came to office. So these are the metrics by which we're going to judge him on city services. This is the second year we've done that. We'll do it the third year and the fourth year. And so when he's running for re-election, we will have 4 years of taking a look at what people think about the city of Los Angeles. And remember, we oversampled the city of LA. We interviewed 2,400 people countywide, 1,200 of them in the city of LA. Okay, and so we could do this both by the city and by the county. This is county level, but we also have a city level, and we can talk about all of this stuff. One of the interesting things is about how things have changed. For instance, public transportation. If you take a look at here, it's 48%. Not what Regina talked about, traffic and mobility. That's down here 30%, that's being stuck on the 5 today. But you should be on public transportation, which would have dropped you off a couple of blocks here and you could have walked, right? And so you could see that the people are recognizing this, that it's changing. And we have a variety of different other data about this, all right? And then neighborhood satisfaction level, okay, we ask people, is it a great place for, your neighborhood as a place to live overall? 86% of our respondents believe that their neighborhood is a good place to live. People are optimistic. People in LA are fine, okay? And look at this. We always talk about you got to get out of LA to raise your children. 67% of people believe it's a good place to raise your children. And when we do it by the people who have children, it's even higher, okay? Even a place to retire, okay? And so overall quality, 84%. This is consistent with the previous year, so it was not an anomaly. Okay, and all of this ticked up just a little bit, obviously, because of the improving economy from 14 to 15. All right, and then would you recommend LA as a place to live? And 81% in 2014 and 83% in 2015. Okay, this we don't have. Well, basically, we were asking. This is the leaders. We asked them. Who's more important in making decisions? And of course, they're self-involved and they believe their city councils are, right? Only 3% thought the county board of supervisors, and of course, if you deal with health, that's, very important, but, only 15%, right? And this is, in 2014, we interviewed 60 of the 88 mayors. In 2015, we interviewed the city managers, okay? But you could see how in the bubble they are, okay? All right. And this is more leadership stuff right here. Let me just go back to this right here. Okay. The minimum wage. Okay. Right here. 81% of Angelenos believe the minimum wage should be raised. Okay. Every time you take a look at major social issues, for instance, gay marriage or what have you. Once the surveys start going up, they don't ever go down. So I project that this 1% to increase the minimum wage in Los Angeles, that's not going to go down. It's only going to continue to increase, as the same for gay marriage or the same for civil rights in the 60s or 70s. And it passes a threshold where it's a given that this is what citizens want. So while we're having the debate about minimum wage, and yes, it depends on how you ask the question and all that, but this is at gut level, Angelenos and Californians believe that we have to have a minimum wage, and they're looking for leadership to then push that, which they are at the city level. And of course, all the different details have to be worked out, but that's what leaders are supposed to do. And this is what citizens are supposed to do, is tell you in general where they believe we should be heading. And Angelenos strongly believe in the minimum wage. And so there is no pushback in terms of the minimum wage from residents or from voters. But obviously, we have to figure out the details and all of that. Again, leadership needs to do that. One of the things that I wanted to focus on here is civic engagement. Well, I was the president of the Electoral Reform Commission appointed by Mayor Garcetti and President of the Council Wesson after the mayoral election 2 years ago, where we had the lowest turnout in the history of Los Angeles at 23%. And what was wrong? And why are we not engaging? Okay. Since that election, Los Angeles, May 2013, the Pasadena, which we tend to think of it being more civically engaged, also had a mayoral election with no incumbent and all kinds of great candidates running. What was their turnout? 19%. Okay. Long Beach then had an election for mayor with no incumbent running, all kinds of great candidates. They could have elected their first African American, their first Latino, their first gay candidate, so they elected a Latino who's gay to get to, and so lots of great candidates. What was their turnout? 17%. Okay? Low turnout in municipal elections is not a uniquely Los Angeles challenge. It's not even a uniquely California challenge. It is happening throughout the nation. Dallas, 2 years ago, in their municipal elections, had a 5% turnout. Okay? About 2 weeks ago, when we had the election for school board, 3 of the 7 school board members, we had an 8% turnout. Okay? And this is the largest elected school board in the nation. Remember, New York is appointed. Actually, it's the largest elected school board in the Western Hemisphere. And yet, only 10% of the population came and turned out. And so we were asked to study this. At first I said, I don't want to be on the commission. I already know what the problem is. And I already know what some of the solutions are, and you're never going to do this. And so they're, no, we'll be supportive, et cetera. And they ended up being supportive. And first I tried a radical idea, and that was to, we have 4 regularly scheduled elections, to get rid of 3 of them and only have 1. Get rid of staggered terms. How many of you know what staggered terms are? We stagger the terms in the U.S. Senate, we stagger them in the City Council. Why do we do that? Whatever you guys said, it doesn't matter. You're wrong. There's no good reason to do that, other than to preserve and be conservative and to make sure that any new movement that comes along can't take over right away. Okay? It's a very conservative law. But in terms of public policy, it makes no sense. In terms of people say, well, experience, well, not everybody leaves at the same time, because you see it in the state assembly, they don't have staggered terms, and over 1/3 of the assembly is still there, and now will be more than that. And so staggered terms doesn't mean that everybody leaves at once, okay? But it costs us more. And therefore, we have an election that's got 23% when the mayor runs, and an election that's got 10% when he doesn't run. And so it's unequal that half the council gets elected only with 10%, and half of them get elected with 23%, right? Get rid of staggered terms, get rid of the primary, and have this ranked choice voting where you go and you mark your 3 and you have the sync, and San Francisco and Oakland do it, and it works, but people are afraid. And so they didn't want to do that. But I knew they weren't going to want to do that. So I put the most radical option up there so that I could get the second option, which was to move the election to the presidential term. And then that way, all of a sudden, turnout goes from 23% to at the presidential has been over 60% consistently. So turnout has declined at every level, every jurisdiction, except what? President. In November of 2016, we will have a consistent turnout, just about, all right? My freshman students come to class and I say, when's the election? They say November. Who's running? Hillary. Who else? I don't know. But then you say, when's the city election? November. No. And they come up with, you know, all kinds of crazy days. Like May 19th. We had the election May 19th. Wasn't the second Tuesday, wasn't the first Tuesday, May 19th. The city of LA elections, if I were to draw them up and say, I want to draw elections that will have the lowest turnout, I would do exactly what the city has done. Make them in the off year, make them nonpartisan, make them on weird dates, May 19th, make them 3 months, the primary 3 months immediately after the governor's race when we're all already exhausted. Okay? If you think about that, it's the worst time. So it's easy for political scientists to talk about civic engagement. We just use turnout, okay? And there's a great malaise in America because turnout is declining on just about every single angle. And now part of it in Los Angeles, I can explain. No ideological competition. Everybody's a liberal Democrat running. Wendy Gruhl and Eric Garcetti. People who love Eric Garcetti say, no, there was big differences. Like what? I love Eric Garcetti, but there's no big, these are two liberal Democrats running, okay? Every city council race. Now, the only major wedge issue we now have is in school board races, charter schools versus unions, okay? But even that doesn't resonate with people. We just did an exit poll during the 5th district, and it just showed that people didn't understand that distinction, all right? And so what I'm suggesting to you is that in this one party, we just mentioned that there's no party competition. Republicans don't exist. There's no ideological distinction, right? And the one great mobilizer throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, minority incorporation, has already occurred. We've had a black mayor. We've had a Latino mayor. We've had whatever you want to call Eric Garcetti mayor. We've had. Even though there's only one woman on the city council today, 7 of the 15 council districts have elected women at one point or another. And so minority incorporation has occurred. And so when you have these elections, there's very little distinction, and people pick that up because they're not talking about what? Economic disparity, or what they're going to do about it, or housing issues, etc. So what does that mean? That means that they need agents of change, they need advocates, they need people from outside the political system helping define that. They're looking for leaders, and they're not in the elected arena. They're in the, sorry, Dr. Ross, the nonprofit sector, okay? And that becomes you, and it goes all the way back in terms of pushing that leadership. I'll end here. As I said, I'm used to speaking in 3-hour increments, and so my apologies for being rushed.
Well, that certainly is provocative. If we can't get people to vote, and it's sort of like old news if we're all kind of on the same page, I'm not sure what that means for us to get people to care about the issues that we care about. Do you guys have thoughts about that? Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, you know, for instance, that we're all going to have liberal Democrats on the city council, right? And you can actually, there is vote dilution still going on to some extent. There's a very important case that the Supreme Court just decided to hear last week, where they will not count immigrants in for apportionment of congressional districts or redistricting. That will immediately, if taken to its theoretical conclusion, that would take 5 congressional seats away from California and give them to the South, okay? That tells you what's going to happen with that, okay? And you have to understand that the political system is completely unfair. 2 years ago, Democrats won over 1 million more votes for U.S. House of Representatives than Republicans did. Yet Republicans got their largest gain ever. How does that happen? And that's because of reapportionment. and redistricting. And that still continues to exist and dilute the vote. And so those are some struggles in the political arena. But the bottom line is that you have a lot of like-minded people, and to some extent we get a little bit lazy saying, oh, we're all Democrats, we're all liberal up in the state legislature. And they, you know, right now they can push all kinds of legislation, especially with the type of money that we have. I'm not against Governor Brown trying to be a fiscal agent, you know, but he's has the opportunity right now, maybe not with $1 billion or say, but to start certain programs that he can do, and we should be there pushing for that.
To restore some of those programs as the money comes back. I guess the other thing is, if there's optimism, we want to kind of ride that wave somehow. It seems that that was kind of the overwhelming.
That's number one.
We're feeling pretty good about things, other than maybe housing costs and maybe jobs. But it seems that there was some optimism that was pretty consistent.
Okay, what is the number one resource that you have at your organization? It's your people. What is the number one resource we have in Los Angeles? It's people. Second, optimistic people are even more of a resource, okay? And right now we are poised to be mobilized and incredibly optimistic to be taken in a certain direction, and yet there's no mobilization going on. People are incredibly, at the same time, optimistic about their lives and their futures, but yet alienated from the political system, okay? And we're waiting for something, some structure, some system, some leader, or sets of leaders to help us mobilize in the right direction.
So I want to open it up to a couple of questions before we say goodbye to you.
Well, it's not goodbye, it'll just be...
I have one back here. Back here. Yep, Judy Harper from Community Partners. Talking about institutional change, I totally agree, but there's also that other piece, which is the intangible, the stuff that's hard to measure, what motivates people to get civically engaged at any level, the ultimate level maybe being voter change. And for most of it, it was some kind of involvement or engagement, often with nonprofit organizations, when we were teenagers, when we were youth. And we're finding that, you know, philanthropy has gone towards investing in policy change and environmental change, and not so much in the programs that would get people involved in the political system, connect it with it in a way that you trust it. I have a 32-year-old son. He hasn't voted ever. And I say, why don't you vote? He says, because it's all corrupt, you know, that typical thing. And he's never really been engaged and been able to build trust, knowing local elected officials, et cetera. So what would you say to the other aspect, aside from the institutional change, which I agree, yeah, we have to have elections that are on the right spot, that cultural change that comes about from sort of grassroots activism and work?
No, and I mean, to further your point, you know, at Loyola Marymount University and most universities, we actually see an increasing amount of engagement, civic engagement from our students, while voting is declining. Students see and define engagement not in the political arena, and they find it very detached. Unfortunately, the greatest mobilizer in politics is fear, not hope. And all you have to do is go back to 1994 and Proposition 187. And what did that do? That scared the Latino community, and it mobilized tremendously. Now, you know, that you want somebody to move fast, scare them, unfortunately. And how do we scare them? You know, climate change, that to me is pretty scary, because that doesn't seem to resonate to a large group. So, you know, there's a way to try to, in a sense, get young people to understand the scary parts about the future if they don't engage and take over these institutions. The other thing is that change is too slow. So what I've been advocating is, which really, I get a tremendous amount of resistance from the political establishment, is that we allow a system that allows for change to happen rapidly. You have to understand that our political system is incredibly conservative and was purposely structured not to have quick change. From the Constitution to every structure that we have in the city of LA, it was purposely structured to prevent rapid change. And that's what we need to reform, is to allow for rapid change to occur, and so that people get immediate gratification that in one election, all 15 council members are up, and all school board members are up, and that you can mobilize people for one time every 4 years instead of 4 times every 4 years with special elections and all that kind of baloney, and you focus on that one election, and you know it's going to happen in 4 years, and you can have radical change. Will that solve it? I don't know, but it creates the opportunity to solve it. It creates the opportunity for change.
Good morning, Dr. Guerra. I'm Sarah Angel from the California Charter Schools Association, part of the wedge issues you mentioned. My question actually focuses on the #1 issue that you have that people are supportive of, feminism. But you did mention that in your surveys, about 5% of the leaders that you surveyed were women, that we have a dearth of women on the city council currently. We've had a few that have been elected over the past, several decades. Wendy Gruhl's run for mayor. She was very similar to Eric Garcetti, but was not elected. Carolyn Ramsey was just not elected, and she was part of the power establishment. At a statewide level, we've had people like Jenny Oropeza, who I used to work for, and I know you were a dear friend of as well, run for speaker. We now have a female speaker, but that is a rarity, and she'll be termed out soon. And it's not quite clear whether there's women positioned to be speaker. And then at the statewide electoral level, we don't have a lot of women elected. Attorney General Kamala Harris is an exception, I think. So I was wondering if you could speak to the difference between this support for feminism, identification of the rights of women, but the lack of seeing them potentially as leaders.
Mm-hmm. So we had an increase in the number of women, and it was projecting and going up very strongly. Then it stops, and it actually declines. And in political science, we've been studying this. We don't have a clue as to why that happened. Now, we are thinking that what happened is that many women, very qualified, were putting themselves up for political office. As the economy opened up and there were other opportunities, they began taking those channels and weren't putting themselves up for office. One of my colleagues, Professor Richard Fox and Jennifer Lawless, they've written extensively about the lack of women in politics. Their #1 conclusion is women don't run, therefore they can't get elected. And so the question becomes why they don't run, and they started going back to then surveying young women in terms of running, why they don't run, and just about being disengaged. They're even further disengaged by traditional leadership styles which favor males. And so it's sort of like, hey, let's have the student council or whatever, and that's not the type of leadership that appeals to young girls, but yet that's what we've institutionalized, and that's what we say we have. Wendy Gruhl, I think she ran away from being a woman. That's kind of weird to say, huh? Mm-hmm. But if you think about a cause celeb, there's a way that Latino candidates and black candidates, they don't have to really talk about it, but yet it takes off. And she was very resistant about being a cause celeb. In our exit poll, women voted 50% for Wendy Gruhl and 50% for Eric Garcetti. Eric Garcetti won because there was a gender gap. He got 67% of the male vote, okay? And so Eric Garcetti is our male candidate. He should be doing all the things for men.
The men were behind him.
And so it's a troubling trend that we see, and actually it's continuing to decline. And Carolyn Ramsey's, again, another story. How was she different, and how was she going to shake up the system? Now, when I first started at Loyola Marymount University in the mid-'80s, talking about Latino politics, I said, man, once Latinos get into power, they're going to change the system. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. They became part of the system, reinforced it, reinvigorated it, and now I'm like, okay, now we need to have women be in charge, and they will change the system. But most of the women that have gotten into leadership position haven't challenged the system. And so when you see collectively women saying, yeah, symbolically it's important to have women in positions of power, but substantively, women do substantively have a few better priorities in terms of the things that we would carry around this room, but not radically different. And so I'm beginning to be pessimistic about the role of women leadership. I believe strongly, symbolically, that we should be at equal status, but they're not going to change the system in terms of the women, what it takes to be and position yourself to finally be mayor or governor or what have you, you've already been indoctrinated to the existing values, and you're not going to change that.
You know, it's funny, even in the nonprofit sector, when you look at the largest nonprofits, those tend to be male. But you look at the majority of EDs around the country, small to medium, it's women doing those jobs.
Right, and we see that.
We take ourselves out of the game.
So as the positions of power in terms of prestige get lower, you have higher number of women. So the highest percent of women representation is on school board. You know? You see that.
All right, we're going to have time for one more. I'm so sorry.
Hi, Wei Ting Chen with Blue Garnet, and I actually have two questions. One is, I think, a pretty brief one, which is earlier on, there was an interesting data point when you were talking about Angelenos and identifying as Angelenos, and it looked like leaders actually identified less as Angelenos than the populace, so I'm kind of curious what your interpretation of that is. And then the second point is, I think it's actually exciting for me to know that Angelenos lean left. However, I feel like the devil's in the details. And so can you speak to what you know or don't know about the how of achieving some of these ideological ends, like divides or unifies us?
Yeah. So number one, in terms of the leaders, those are professional city managers that move around from city to city, sometimes county to county, and they see themselves more as professional city managers than identifying necessarily with a geographic area. Also remember, they were dispersed. Only one of them actually lives in the city of LA. So the other 56, we were asking you to consider yourself an Angeleno, even though you live in LA County, but you don't live in the city. So a lot of people sometimes define just being Angeleno being in the city of LA. So even given that, I think the results are remarkable. In terms of activating this, it's not for obviously the people to activate, it's for the leaders to activate and how you activate that. One interesting thing about the charter movement, one of the surveys we just finished in this past May 19th election is we asked if all you knew about the two candidates was that one was backed by the teachers union and the other one was backed by the charter movement, who would you vote for? And unions beat charters by a lot, okay? Yet people still voted for the pro-charter person for a variety of different other reasons. And so one of the things you need to do is how do we communicate these, who stands for which issue? Because oftentimes the candidate will go up there, and even though they may briefly believe in this stuff, they see the polling and they'll position themselves in certain ways. Like gun control is off the charts, not only for LA, but in terms of California, that we're in favor of it. Yet the type of legislation we get in Sacramento is minuscule for that. So.
Thank you so much.
No,
this
thank you
gives
for
us
having
an
me.
awful lot to think about.